Here is the concluding part of Adebisi's story. Adebisi dreamed of building a business empire, one that would not only provide for his family but also create opportunities for others. But as he would soon discover, the road to success was fraught with danger, and the greatest challenges were yet to come. As Adebisi's herb business flourished, he began to gain recognition in Ibadan. His stall in the market became a hub of activity, attracting customers from all walks of life. But amidst the hustle and bustle, Adebisi found himself drawn to a quiet corner of the market where a young woman sold handmade jewelry. Her name was Adesila, and she was unlike anyone Adebisi had ever met. She was graceful and intelligent, with a smile that could light up the darkest of days. Her stall was modest, but her creations were exquisite, delicate beads and intricate designs that reflected her creativity and skill. Adebisi found excuses to visit her stall, often lingering to chat even when he had no business there. Adesila was warm and kind, but there was a quiet strength about her that intrigued him. She spoke of her dreams of opening a school for girls, a vision that resonated deeply with Adebisi. One afternoon, as the market began to wind down, Adebisi gathered his courage and asked Adesila if she would join him for a walk. To his delight, she agreed. They strolled through the narrow streets of Ibadan, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the city. "You're different from the other traders," Adesila said, her voice soft but curious. "You don't just talk about money. You talk about people, about making a difference." Adebisi smiled. "I've seen what poverty can do. I don't just want to be rich, I want to help others rise too." Adesila's eyes sparkled with admiration. "That's a rare quality in this city." As the weeks passed, their friendship deepened into something more. Adebisi found himself falling for Adesila, her kindness and ambition mirroring his own dreams. But their budding romance was not without its challenges. One evening, as Adebisi walked Adesila home, they were confronted by a group of men. At their head was a tall, well-dressed man with a sneer on his face. Adebisi recognized him immediately. It was Alyamide, the same ruthless trader who had tried to sabotage Baba Tun's business. "Well, well," Alyamide said, his voice dripping with mockery. "If it isn't the little herb trader. And who's this lovely lady?" Adesila stepped closer to Adebisi, her expression wary. "What do you want, Alyamide?" Adebisi asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Alyamide smirked. "Just a friendly warning. You're getting too big for your boots, boy. Ibadan isn't kind to upstarts." Adebisi clenched his fists but said nothing. He knew better than to engage with Alyamide in a public confrontation. As Alyamide and his men walked away, Adesila turned to Adebisi, her eyes filled with concern. "Who was that?" "Trouble," Adebisi replied grimly. "But don't worry. I can handle him." Adesila nodded, but the encounter left a shadow over their evening. When they reached her home, she hesitated before speaking. "Adebisi, my family, they're traditional. They have certain expectations. They might not approve of us." Adebisi's heart sank, but he refused to let his fear show. "Then I'll prove myself to them," he said firmly. "I'll show them that I'm worthy of you." Adesila smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "It won't be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," Adebisi replied. As he walked home that night, Adebisi felt a mix of emotions: hope, determination, and a growing sense of urgency. He knew that his relationship with Adesila would face obstacles, but he was willing to fight for her. At the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that Alyamide's warning was more than just empty words. The city of Ibadan was a battlefield, and Adebisi was about to face his greatest challenge yet. Alyamide was a man of influence and power, with a network of allies that stretched across Ibadan. He had built his wealth on a foundation of intimidation and corruption, and he saw Adebisi as a threat to his dominance. Over the next few weeks, Adebisi's business began to face a series of setbacks. Shipments of herbs were delayed or went missing, customers were poached, and rumors began to circulate about the quality of Adebisi's goods. At first, Adebisi tried to ignore the problems, focusing on his work and his growing relationship with Adesila. But the attacks grew more brazen, and it became clear that Alyamide was behind them. One evening, as Adebisi and Baba Tun sat discussing the situation, the old man sighed. "Alyamide is a dangerous enemy," he said. "But he's also predictable. He thrives on fear and chaos. If you can outsmart him, you can beat him. Adebisi nodded, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't confront Olyamide directly. He didn't have the resources or the influence. But he also knew he couldn't let Olyamide destroy everything he had worked for. The next day, Adebisi began to quietly gather information about Olyamide's operations. He spoke to other traders, suppliers, and even some of Olyamide's disgruntled former employees. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, a web of corruption and deceit that Olyamide had carefully constructed. Adebisi realized that the key to defeating Olyamide lay in exposing his crimes. But doing so would require careful planning and a willingness to take risks. As he prepared to make his move, Adebisi couldn't help but think of Adesela. He knew that his actions would put him in danger, but he also knew that he couldn't back down. The battle for Ibadan had begun, and Adebisi was determined to come out on top. Adebisi's plan to take down Olyamide was risky, but he had no other choice. He couldn't let the man continue to sabotage his business and intimidate others in the market. With Baba Tun's guidance, Adebisi began to lay the groundwork for his strategy. First, he reached out to other traders who had suffered under Olyamide's reign. Many were hesitant to speak out, fearing retaliation, but Adebisi's sincerity and determination won them over. Slowly, he built a coalition of allies, small traders, suppliers, and even a few influential customers who were tired of Olyamide's tactics. Next, Adebisi focused on gathering evidence of Olyamide's corruption. He discovered that Olyamide had been bribing officials to secure exclusive trading rights and undercutting competitors by selling counterfeit goods. Adebisi documented everything, from witness testimonies to financial records, compiling a damning case against his rival. But the most dangerous part of the plan was yet to come. Adebisi needed to confront Olyamide directly, and he knew it wouldn't be easy. One evening, as the market was closing, Adebisi approached Olyamide's stall. The man was lounging in a chair, surrounded by his cronies, a smug smile on his face. "Well, if it isn't the little herb trader," Olyamide said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Come to beg for mercy." Adebisi stood tall, his expression calm but determined. "No, Olyamide. I've come to give you a choice." Olyamide raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "A choice? And what might that be?" "You can stop your attacks on my business and leave the market in peace," Adebisi said, his voice steady. "Or I can expose your crimes to the entire city." For a moment, there was silence. Then Olyamide burst out laughing, his cronies joining in. "You think you can threaten me, boy? You're nothing but a peasant playing at being a trader." Adebisi didn't flinch. He reached into his bag and pulled out a stack of papers, copies of the evidence he had gathered. "These are just a sample," he said, handing them to Olyamide. "If you don't back down, I'll make sure everyone in Ibadan knows the truth about you." Olyamide's smile faded as he scanned the documents. His face turned red with anger, and he crumpled the papers in his fist. "You think this will stop me? I'll destroy you before you can even think of spreading these lies." Adebisi met his gaze without fear. "Then you'll have to live with the consequences. But remember, Olyamide, I'm not afraid of you." The confrontation left Adebisi shaken but resolute. He knew Olyamide wouldn't back down easily, but he also knew he had struck a nerve. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Adebisi felt a glimmer of hope. With Olyamide temporarily distracted, Adebisi focused on expanding his business. He used the profits from his herb trade to invest in farmland, purchasing a plot of land on the outskirts of Ibadan. There, he began to cultivate his own herbs, ensuring a steady supply of high-quality goods. He also diversified his business, branching out into livestock and real estate. He bought a small herd of goats and rented out a few properties in the city, creating multiple streams of income. His wealth grew steadily, and he began to gain a reputation as a shrewd and innovative trader. But success came at a cost. Adebisi worked tirelessly, often spending long hours at the market or traveling to oversee his farms. He had little time for Adesela, and their relationship began to strain under the weight of his ambitions. One evening, as they sat together in the market square, Adesela broke the silence. "Adebisi, I miss you. You're always working, always chasing the next deal. When do we get to live our lives?" Adebisi sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, Adesela. But I'm doing this for us, For our future. I want to build something that will last, something that will provide for our family." Adesela reached out and took his hand, her eyes filled with love and concern. "I understand, Adebisi. But don't forget to enjoy the journey. Life is more than just money and success." Her words stayed with Adebisi long after she left. He knew she was right, but he also knew he couldn't stop now. The city of Ibadan was a battlefield, and he was determined to come out on top. Despite the challenges, Adebisi's love for Adesela only grew stronger. He knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, but he also knew he had to prove himself to her family. One evening, after months of careful planning, Adebisi arranged a meeting with Adesela's parents. He arrived at their home with a basket of gifts, fine fabrics, rare herbs, and a jar of honey from his farm. Adesela's father, a stern but respected elder, greeted him with a wary expression. "What brings you here, young man?" Adebisi took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "Sir, I've come to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. I love Adesela, and I promise to provide for her and honor her for the rest of my life." The room fell silent as Adesela's parents exchanged glances. Finally, her father spoke. "You've done well for yourself, Adebisi. But marriage is a serious matter. We need to know that you can truly care for our daughter." Adebisi nodded, his resolve unwavering. "I understand, sir. And I'm willing to prove myself in any way I can." Adesela's mother, a kind but practical woman, smiled softly. "We'll discuss it and let you know." As Adebisi left their home that night, he felt a mix of hope and anxiety. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to fight for the woman he loved. The day of Adebisi and Adesela's wedding dawned bright and clear, the sky a brilliant blue without a single cloud in sight. The entire city of Ibadan seemed to buzz with excitement as people from all walks of life gathered to celebrate the union of the ambitious young trader and the kind-hearted teacher. Adebisi stood at the center of the festivities, dressed in a flowing agbada made of the finest fabric, its intricate embroidery catching the sunlight. He looked every bit the successful man he had become, but his heart was a whirlwind of emotions. This was the day he had dreamed of, the day he would finally make Adesela his wife. Yet, beneath the joy, there was a lingering unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that Olyamide, his rival, was lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Adesela, radiant in a geli and iro of deep indigo, walked toward him with a grace that took his breath away. Her smile was warm and reassuring, as if she could sense his worries and was silently telling him to let them go. The ceremony was a beautiful blend of tradition and love, with elders offering blessings and the couple exchanging vows that spoke of partnership, respect, and unwavering support. As the celebrations continued into the night, with music, dancing, and feasting, Adebisi allowed himself to relax. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. He was surrounded by people who cared for him: Baba Tund, his mentor, Adesela, his love, and even his parents, who had traveled from Okar to witness their son's triumph. But just as the festivities reached their peak, a commotion erupted at the edge of the gathering. Adebisi turned to see a group of men pushing their way through the crowd. At their head was Olyamide, his face twisted into a sneer. "Congratulations, Adebisi," Olyamide said, his voice dripping with mockery. "I see you finally found someone foolish enough to marry you." The crowd fell silent, the joyous atmosphere shattered. Adebisi stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "This is not the time or place, Olyamide. Leave now, or I'll have you removed." Olyamide laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, I'll leave. But don't think this is over. You may have one today, but Ibadan is still my city, and I'll make sure you regret crossing me." With that, Olyamide and his men turned and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a cloud of tension. Adebisi forced a smile and tried to reassure his guests, but the damage had been done. The wedding, once a symbol of joy and triumph, now felt like a fragile victory. As the night wore on, Adebisi found himself standing alone on the outskirts of the celebration, staring into the darkness. Adesela approached him, her hand gently resting on his arm. "Don't let him ruin this day," she said softly. "We've worked too hard for this moment." Adebisi nodded, but his mind was already racing. He knew Olyamide wouldn't stop until he had destroyed everything Adebisi had built. And now, with Adesela by his side, he had even more to lose. The weeks following the wedding were a blur of happiness and tension. Adebisi and Adesela settled into their new life together, but the shadow of Olyamide's threat loomed large. Adebisi doubled down on his efforts to protect his business, hiring guards to watch over his farms and warehouses. One night, as Adebisi and Adesela slept, a loud banging on their door jolted them awake. Adebisi rushed to the door to find one of his workers, breathless and covered in soot. "It's the warehouse," the man gasped. "It's on fire." Adebisi's heart sank as he raced to the scene. The warehouse, filled with his precious herbs and goods, was engulfed in flames. The fire raged out of control, consuming everything in its path. Adebisi could only watch in horror as years of hard work went up in smoke. When the fire was finally extinguished, all that remained was a smoldering ruin. Adebisi stood amidst the ashes, his face streaked with soot and tears. He knew this was no accident. This was Olyamide's doing. Adesela arrived shortly after, her face pale with shock. She wrapped her arms around Adebisi, offering what comfort she could. "We'll rebuild," she whispered. "We've done it before, and we can do it again." But Adebisi's heart was heavy with doubt. The fire had not only destroyed his goods, but also his confidence. He had always believed that hard work and determination would see him through, but now he wondered if he had underestimated the lengths Olyamide would go to destroy him. In the days that followed, Adebisi threw himself into rebuilding his business. He worked tirelessly, sourcing new goods, repairing the warehouse, and reassuring his customers. But the fire had taken a toll, both financially and emotionally. One evening, as Adebisi sat alone in his makeshift office, Baba Tund paid him a visit. The old man's presence was a comfort, but his words were blunt. "You can't keep going like this, Adebisi. Olyamide is playing a dangerous game, and you need to be smarter if you want to win." Adebisi sighed, running a hand over his face. "What do you suggest?" "I can't fight him directly, he has too much power." Baba Tund leaned forward, his eyes sharp with intensity. "Then fight him indirectly. Use his own tactics against him. Expose his crimes, turn his allies against him, and weaken him from within." Adebisi nodded slowly, a plan beginning to form in his mind. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he had no other choice. The fire had been a devastating blow, but it had also ignited a new determination in him. He would rebuild his business, protect his family, and take down Olyamide, no matter what it took. Adebisi and Adesela welcomed their first child, a son named Tund, a year after the fire. The birth brought joy and renewed purpose to Adebisi's life. Holding his son for the first time, he vowed to build a future where Tund would never know the struggles he had faced. But balancing fatherhood and business was no easy task. Adebisi's days were a blur of meetings, deliveries, and late nights at the market. Adesela, though patient, often reminded him of his promise to find balance. "Tund needs his father," she said one evening, her voice gentle but firm. Adebisi nodded, guilt gnawing at him. He wanted to be present, but the weight of his responsibilities felt crushing. One night, as he rocked Tund to sleep, Adebisi made a silent promise. He would find a way to succeed without sacrificing his family. Adebisi's growing influence caught the attention of local leaders. They invited him to join the Traders' Council, a powerful group that shaped Ibadan's commerce. At first, Adebisi hesitated. Politics was a dangerous game, filled with corruption and betrayal. But Baba Tund urged him to accept. "This is your chance to make real change," he said. Adebisi joined the council, determined to use his position for good. But he quickly realized that not everyone shared his vision. Olyamide, now a council member, smirked during their first meeting. "Welcome to the big leagues, Adebisi. Let's see how long you last." Adebisi clenched his fists but said nothing. He knew the battle had just begun. Adebisi's trust in his team was shattered when he discovered that his most loyal employee, Kazim, had been stealing from him. "Why?" Adebisi asked, his voice trembling with anger. Kazim hung his head. "Olyamide paid me. He said it was the only way to protect my family." Adebisi fired Kazim but couldn't shake the betrayal. He realized that Olyamide's reach extended further than he had imagined. Determined to make a difference, Adebisi began using his wealth to help others. He built a school in Okar, his hometown, and funded a well for the village. The projects brought him a sense of fulfillment, but they also made him a target. One night, a note was left at his door: "Stop playing hero, or you'll regret it." Adebisi knew Olamide was behind it, but he refused to back down. Adebisi's worst nightmare came true when Tund was kidnapped. A ransom note demanded a fortune in exchange for his son's safe return. Panic gripped Adebisi, but he forced himself to think clearly. He couldn't let fear cloud his judgment. With Baba Tund's help, Adebisi devised a plan to outsmart the kidnappers. Adebisi followed the kidnappers' instructions, delivering the ransom to a remote location. But he had also alerted the authorities, who lay in wait. A tense standoff ensued, but Adebisi's quick thinking saved the day. Tund was rescued unharmed, and the kidnappers were arrested. As he held his son close, Adebisi vowed to never let his guard down again. Adebisi's rescue of Tund exposed Olamide's involvement in the kidnapping. The authorities raided Olamide's properties, uncovering evidence of fraud, bribery, and other crimes. Olamide was arrested, his empire crumbling overnight. The city buzzed with the news, and many celebrated his downfall. Adebisi, however, felt no joy. He had won, but the cost had been high. As he watched Olamide being led away in chains, Adebisi whispered, "This is not victory. This is justice." With Olamide gone, Adebisi's business flourished. He expanded his farms, opened new markets, and even ventured into international trade. But success brought new challenges. Adebisi struggled to balance his growing empire with his responsibilities as a husband and father. One evening, Adesela reminded him, "Wealth means nothing if we lose ourselves in the process." Her words struck a chord. Adebisi began to focus on building a legacy that would outlast him, one rooted in integrity and compassion. Adebisi's relentless work ethic took a toll on his health. He collapsed one day at the market, overwhelmed by exhaustion. The doctor's diagnosis was grim. Adebisi needed to slow down or risk permanent damage. As he lay in bed, Adebisi reflected on his life. He had achieved so much, but at what cost? Adesela held his hand, her eyes filled with love and worry. "You're not alone in this," she said. "Let us help you." Adebisi's recovery was slow but steady. He delegated more responsibilities to his team, trusting them to manage his business. For the first time in years, he spent quality time with Adesela and Tund. They took walks, shared meals, and laughed together. Adebisi realized that true wealth wasn't measured in coins or goods, but in the moments that made life meaningful. Just as Adebisi began to enjoy his newfound balance, a young trader named Femi emerged as a new rival. Femi was ambitious and ruthless, much like Olamide had been. But instead of crushing Femi, Adebisi chose a different path. He invited the young man to his office and offered him advice. "Success isn't about destroying others," Adebisi said. "It's about lifting them up." Femi left with a newfound respect for Adebisi, and the city buzzed with admiration for the man who had turned an enemy into an ally. Adebisi's 60th birthday was a grand affair. The entire city of Ibadan came together to honor the man who had risen from nothing to become a legend. The celebration was filled with music, dancing, and heartfelt speeches. Adebisi stood before the crowd, humbled by their love and respect. "This is not just my story," he said. "It is the story of everyone who believed in me. Together, we have built something greater than wealth. We have built a community." As the night ended, Adebisi felt a deep sense of fulfillment. In the quiet moments after the celebration, Adebisi took a walk through the city. He passed the market, his farms, and the school he had built in Okar. Each place held memories of struggles, triumphs, and the people who had shaped his journey. Adebisi realized that his life had been a tapestry of lessons. He had learned the value of hard work, the importance of integrity, and the power of compassion. As he gazed at the stars, he whispered, "I have lived a good life." Adebisi's children, now grown, began to take on more responsibilities in the family business. Tund, his eldest, showed a keen understanding of trade and leadership. One evening, Adebisi gathered his children and shared his final lesson. "Wealth is not measured by money," he said. "It is measured by the lives you touch and the legacy you leave behind." His children nodded, their eyes filled with determination. Adebisi knew the future was in good hands. As Adebisi's health declined, he spent his days surrounded by loved ones. Adesela rarely left his side, her presence a constant source of comfort. One evening, as the sun set, Adebisi called his family to his bedside. "Remember this," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Success is not about how much you have, but how much you give. Live with purpose, and never forget where you came from." Tears filled their eyes as they held his hands, cherishing every word. Adebisi IDIKAN passed away peacefully, surrounded by his family. The city of Ibadan mourned the loss of a great man, but his legacy lived on. His businesses thrived under Tun's leadership, and the school in Okar continued to educate generations of children. Adebisi's story became a source of inspiration, a reminder that with determination, integrity, and compassion, anyone could rise from the dust to greatness. As the people of Ibadan gathered to honor his memory, they whispered his name with reverence. Adebisi IDIKAN was more than a man, he was a legend. Adebisi's life teaches that hard work pays off. Adebisi's journey from poverty to prosperity shows that perseverance and dedication can overcome even the toughest challenges. Also, integrity matters. Success built on honesty and fairness lasts longer and means more than wealth gained through deceit. More so, family first. No amount of success is worth sacrificing the people you love. Balance is key. Furthermore, true wealth is measured by the positive impact you have on others, so learn to give back. And lastly, always prefer legacy over riches. What you leave behind, your values, your contributions, and your story, is more important than material wealth.